Welcome back everybody, and welcome to a new attendees who were not with us earlier. Well, just to begin, just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Beatrice Mwangi. I work with the Center for Affordable Housing Finance, and our main focus is housing finance and the entire housing value chain. We aim to make the housing markets work in Africa, and this we support by providing market intelligence. So we focus on data, market analytics, and research. So, welcome to this housing forum, which is a partnership between the EAPI and the Affordable and the African Union for Housing Finance, so really the AHF. So the AHF is a member association, which is in Africa, or operates within Africa, and the aim is to make or to promote effective housing markets. And this they do by lobbying and advocacy activities, and also fostering conversations among stakeholders. So for ease of communication, just to do a little bit of housekeeping, the Wi-Fi details should be displayed on the screen, and if not, please use the Radisson guest's Wi-Fi, which is easy to access and it doesn't have a password at the moment. If you're joining us for the first time and didn't join us in the earlier session, we intend to have a collaborative environment in which we want to promote thoughtful discussions throughout the day. This forum has both continental and global participants, so make sure your presentations or your contribution is clear, simple, and easy to understand for all participants. We also aim to have active participation from all members, so whether you're making a presentation or asking questions or making comments, you're most welcome to do so. Emergency protocol, just in case we have an emergency, please take and we'll exit in an orderly manner. We came in through the main door, which is still the emergency assembly point. In case of any emergency, we'll still assemble at that point. In case you don't have the Glue app, that is what the EAPI team is using, so please download it. And from that, you can get any updates you need on this forum. So we are currently in Kilimanjaro 3. This is where we'll be having the forum. And once we're done with our mid-morning session, we'll proceed for lunch, which is going to be upstairs at 1 p.m. at the Mount Elgon room. We intend to finish our day by 5:30 p.m. African time. Hopefully we'll be able to give time. And after that, we'll have the networking cocktails, which is going to be at the Mount Elgon Terrace later on. To our speakers, you're kindly asked to use the first few rows, so it's easy to access the podium. Please spare a few minutes at the end of your presentation or your discussion just for question and answer. This could be 5 to 7 minutes. I will also give an indication on when you have about 10 minutes left for your session. If you're making use of the social media platforms, we have two hashtags we would like to request you to use. One is the 2023 EAPI Affordable Housing Forum. The other one is the Affordable Housing, which is just the AH Forum 2023 on all social media platforms. That said, we want to get into the main agenda, which is the sessions. You can all expect very candid conversations, and some of the themes we're going to be touching on. One is incentives. We're going to look at off-take financing. We're going to look at underwriting for the informal incomes. We're going to look at the construction costs benchmarking, which will be through a presentation. And finally, we'll also look at the affordable housing government program. So you can look forward to that. So to start us off, we'll have a welcome to the EAPI, which I mentioned is part of the
Thank you, Beatrice. Good morning. Are we all excited about this? Yeah, we need to be excited about housing because we are all stakeholders of housing. Who is not a stakeholder of housing here? Sure, no one can raise their hands. So, collective action to make affordable housing a real possibility. Welcome to the African Union for Housing Finance Affordable Housing Forum. So normally we hold such fora whenever we have other engagements on the African Union for Housing Finance. Yesterday we had a board meeting and a strategy session here, and part of the engagement was certainly to have a forum to discuss affordable housing. So now I have a very simple role of just merely welcoming you to this forum and highlight or give very quick highlights about who the African Union for Housing Finance is, and of which MRC is a member, an active member. Now, and I think I have a presentation. If you can just run that, if it is possible. Otherwise, I will just, I think I have a written one, you can just go through that. So who is a community of practitioners? It is an association of mortgage banks, building societies, housing lenders and micro lenders, housing corporations and other organizations. They are all involved in mobilizing of funds for shelter and housing in Africa. Who doesn't want to be part of such an organization that impacts housing or affordable housing for that matter in our communities? Now, the AUHF actively seeks ways to support participating housing finance markets or participation in housing finance markets in Africa. It's committed to influence governments and private sector to work together to develop and maintain efficient and effective housing markets and access to adequate housing finance. Now, when you look at the history of AUHF, it's about 40-year-old institution, 39 or thereabouts. So it's been here, it's been around for some time. It was established in 1984 with 11 members in 7 countries. Now, it has 61 members in 20 countries around Africa. 61 members in 20 countries. The 20 countries are diverse. Actually, we even have international ones. But when you look at Africa, we have members from the southern part of Africa, like like Botswana, South Africa, and the rest. We have members from the western part of Africa, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire. Northern part of Africa, we have Egypt. And of course, we have East Africa. We have Kenya, Tanzania, and a number of others. I'm just not going to list all of them. And of course, we have Uganda. And in Central Africa, I think we have, or I don't know whether that's really Central Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, which is part of the southern part of Africa. And we have some Pan-African and international ones. Now, what do AUHF do, or what do we do for that matter? So we have 3 key areas that we focus on. Number 1 is on member services. It's about aggregating information and sharing information about housing. And in most cases, our members get priority to data and information that is generated there. We focus on capacity building. So, when we have staff within our organizations, we strengthen capacity building and work in partnership with other institutions that provide capacity building on housing finance. One of the key ones, in fact, that was read recently was at the University of Cape Town, which is a partnership between University of Cape Town, the UHF, and Water Business School in the US. Now, so we also obviously have or provide visibility for our members. We showcase our members in various fora. And this is essentially because our members influence growth of affordable housing in Africa. And we're very proud to get our members in various fora to provide support for affordable housing. The second key area is lobbying and advocacy. So, this is mainly done through the annual conference. So we have annual conferences. For example, the last annual conference was held in Cairo, Egypt. The 39th AUHF annual conference is coming up this year in October, 31st of October to 2nd of November. And so usually after the conferences, we have declarations that we make to ensure that the practices, the discussions we had are actually practical and that they're going to be implemented. We issue fact sheets, so we collect information and issue fact sheets, and also profile local and regional levels. The other third key area that we focus is on investment support, which is on investment landscape databases, open access initiative. And we're going to have a discussion later today by one of us, actually Alan, about the open access and the data agenda. And of course, part of AUHF is to build partnerships. Actually, that's one of the greatest strengths across Africa and actually internationally outside Africa. So certainly you want to be part of a continental body that advocates for affordable housing and efficient housing finance markets. Part of the declarations, I think in the next slide, you can see that during the Cairo, we had some declarations, and you can see that we, how that stands, we, the members of the African Union of Housing Finance, expressed our commitment. So there is no doubt, just go to the next slide please, there is no doubt that we have significant commitment to work together in leveraging diverse capacities, charting new frontiers, and the delivery of affordable housing across the continent. What we usually do with those declarations is we actually share with policymakers across Africa. So for example, the last declarations we made, we shared with our Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development. We actually had to hand it over to the Minister, our Ministry of the National Treasury, and our Central Bank. And that's exactly what happens across other member states in Africa. The idea is to influence policy to support growth of affordable housing. And so we actually get there. And there are a number of declarations. If you want, we can share copies of the declaration that we made, which we also review in the next conference to ensure that we actually are implementing the declarations that we made. When you look at the next slide, we have the AUHF board members, and I'm just about to finish. We have about 10 board members, and we have 3 committees. We have Lobbying and Advocacy Committee, which is chaired by Paul Jackson, who is seated on the far right. We have Membership Service Committee, chaired by Samuel Lakini, who is, I think, here, who is our board member. And we have the Investment Committee, who is chaired by Fondo, who is also on the far right. Now, these are the guys who deliberate on issues that we have, at the board, and actually synthesize the discussions, look at the details at the board meetings when we make the final decisions. Lastly is when you look at the AUHF, members have rights, and of course they have some benefits. Please move to the next slide, and I'm not going to look at all of them, but of course you have the rights of representation, accessing data or information, the profiling of our members, building professional capacity, which is what we mentioned earlier, and shaping the future, which is lobbying and advocacy, and staying informed while we provide information that is very well researched, aggregated by the team. Now, of course, when you get in as a member, you have certain rights. For example, the rights to vote in the AGM, the right to be in the board or a committee. Of course, the right to attend an annual conference, having speaking opportunities for that matter, and obviously having your institutions represented and showcased in various fora. And of course, you enjoy certain discounts there for conferences and for partnerships like capacity building and the rest. And of course, the most important thing is to shape the future of affordable housing in Africa. And of course, you will want to be part of the people who create impact in the housing in Africa. We look forward, if you're not a member yet, and I can see one of my greatest friends who is from APSA here, who is looking at me. You want me to give you the application form? So with that, I think I want to thank you very much, and and welcome you again to the African Union for Housing Finance Forum. Sita, you have a question?
My question was what the fees were for the different bands. I know the FSD Kenya fee that we pay for seems really good value for money for what we get. So thank you. Just wanted to clarify the fees for others who may not know what the fees are.
The fees are very affordable, and we have various categories of fees. We even have individuals who can be members, but more importantly, we have institutions which we categorize as large institutions, small institutions. We have suppliers and things like that. Generally, people who are in the affordable housing space, and the fees start from $2,500 per year. So you see, it's very affordable. It's not really much compared to the kind of benefits you derive, and more importantly, the kind of impact you make, which is exactly why we are very keen on the African Union for Housing Finance. It's the impact that we create on affordable housing in our communities that is fundamentally important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a very good and very detailed presentation of the AUHF. Should you want to know more about it, the program manager is standing right there. She's waving to the audience. Her name is Tanwe Lamini. She can give you more details on how you can be a member and how much you'll need to pay. And you're welcome to join the union. We'll now move on to the next session, which gets us to the conversation of the day. We'll have our first panel discussion titled Evidence of Key Issues Facing Kenya's Affordable Housing Sector. This is going to be moderated by Paul Jackson. He's the CEO of TAF and an AUHF member, as well as the chair of the Lobbying and Advocacy Committee. Welcome, Chair. He's going to be joined by 4 panelists. I'm just going to call the names out and you can kindly walk to the podium. We have Chris Chege, who is the head of credit and operations at Shelter Africa. We have Sita Shah, she's the senior affordable housing specialist at FSD Kenya. We have John Kaburu, who is the regional manager and head of mortgages at ABSA Kenya. Then we have Stanley Maina, who is the CEO of CAP Kenya. Welcome. Chair, can you proceed?
Hello. That's working. Thanks, Beatrice, for that introduction. And welcome everybody to this panel. We've got an agenda to follow, but we're going to kind of move with the conversation. We have a really good panel because we've got practitioners, financiers, DFIs, and researchers all sitting here. And I'm just going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves or their companies, really. Can we start with you, Stan?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon again. Yeah, my name is Stanley Maina. My company is Capgemini Limited. I'm a real estate developer. I develop housing for rental purposes. Thank you.
My name is John Kaburu. I am a regional manager at ABSA Bank, Kenya. I am the head of mortgages. So my job entails supporting the primary person who we are here for, who is a retail person who is getting a house. So my job is to finance them, but also to play in the ecosystem where we play with the developers. We do work closely with the financing team for projects and also talking to stakeholders in the property industry just to see how we can make it easy. At ABSA, our purpose is to empower Africa's tomorrow. We say together, one story at a time. That's what we do.
Thank you, John. Chris?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Chege from Shelter Africa. I am a mortgage banker and I've been a mortgage banker for quite a number of years. That's my background, and essentially that takes in terms of the financing, but I switched now to Shelter Africa. Shelter Africa, for those who do not know, is owned by 44 African governments. They are the shareholders, and their key work is to promote affordable housing across Africa. So we have the 44 states, and we are owned by those 44 states, plus African Development Bank and Africa Re as the institutional investors. And recently, we've opened up for Class C investors. Our key thing is to categorize affordable housing across Africa. And within Shelter Africa, I look at their operations and their credit. And happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Hello everyone, Sita Shah, FSD Kenya. For those who don't know, FSD stands for Financial Sector Deepening. We're funded with various donor funding. Our housing program was launched in 2020 with funding from the British, so we're really grateful. And our housing program spans all 4 submarkets. So while most of the focus of our discussions today is about urban and formal housing, at FSD, because we're trying to serve the bottom 40 as much as possible, our housing program is doing pretty interesting work with incremental housing. You'll hear from our partners, KWFT and IBIL, later today. In the informal settlements, we've been really, really privileged to leverage off recent infrastructure investment and pilot a last mile sanitation fund. And in the formal sector, we're working with State Department to look at tax incentives and enable tax incentives. So it's really trying to create market enabling mechanisms to reduce poverty in different sectors, and housing is the sector that I lead, and I'm joined by Lucy, my colleague. She's here in the room. So really excited to be here and what we can do with these players. Thank you.
Thank you, Sita. So, by way of a small introduction, urbanization, affordable housing, and the pressure on the infrastructure grid is an Africa-wide problem. It's certainly a problem in the country I come from, and it appears to be a problem in Kenya. And linked to this is a prevailing sense that housing delivery needs to be government-led, needs to be big project-led, and it needs to be established developer-led. And increasingly, that sense, that feeling is being challenged to say that in addition to that, on a both-and basis, there is thought about well-placed affordable housing on a number of levels. The first is housing as part of the real economy, housing as a contributor to local economic development and economic growth. The second is that the importance of urban densification, combating urban sprawl, stimulating local economies, smart cities. And in that, the critical role of the small and medium-sized developer, landlord, practitioner, as part of this value chain, and a very, very important value chain. And if you are thinking about inclusive growth, growth that supports poor people, gives entrepreneurial opportunities, giving job opportunities, it's often more a microeconomic concept than a macroeconomic concept. A colleague recently said to me, Paul, if you look around the continent and around the globe, there's not a lot of money for affordable housing. But there's an enormous amount of money for green financing. And this is a big, big affordable housing opportunity. So on Monday, I happened to, was privileged enough to drive through the back streets of Pipeline and Kahawa. And I said to my colleague who was driving me there, I haven't been this blown away in a decade, more. I could not believe what I was seeing. Now, it depends what you want to look at, of course, but what I saw was massive energy, massive economy, huge delivery of housing, often, with the concomitant problems of the grid being, the infrastructure grid being seriously under pressure, of quality of construction not meeting code and safety standards, and all of those things. But it was overwhelming a massive positive impression on me, because the extent of the delivery, just the scale of it, was massive. It wasn't big, it was massive. There was an enormous amount of housing. I am the CEO of a company called Tough, and we were established in the inner city of Johannesburg, and we made built a business that now extends throughout South Africa, having funded 48,000 affordable housing units by funding the people that I saw in Pipeline and in Kahawa. That was exactly what we do as a mortgage financing company. A little bit of background on Tough. We were formed in 2003. We're a commercial property financing company, a non-bank financial services company. In other words, we rely on the capital markets for our funding, and we fund entrepreneurs. So we're not a housing finance company, we're an entrepreneur financing company with a housing outcome. And we have a couple of other products, a bridging finance product to sort of oil the wheels of deals. We have the Intertugo Equity Fund where we support entrepreneurs with equity. And we have an extensive training program, including the Tough program for property entrepreneurs, also linked to UCT. But our products are very standard product. It's geared, we lend over 15 years against a mortgage and a cession of the rentals and a cession of the insurances to entrepreneurs that meet our underwriting criteria. And our loans are based on the underlying cash flows of the business. So when I went through Pipeline and Kahawa, and I understood that the financing structures in Kenya weren't as formal as perhaps we have in South Africa, I just wondered how all this happened. So it was really, really an important and very positive experience for me, notwithstanding the crime and the grime. Not too dissimilar to the inner city of Johannesburg in the early 2000s. But this is not about South Africa, it's about Kenya. So with that very positive perspective on just exactly what Kenyans have done by bringing housing into the city, not on the periphery, but part of the city. I'd like to start the panel by asking, and perhaps you, Stanley, what are the key issues, in your opinion, facing affordable housing in Kenya?
Okay, affordable housing in Kenya, well, let's say it started in 2017 or 2018. So I think since the beginning, we've had a couple of challenges since this has not been there before. So some of the issues that came up, like a new issue now, because issues in Kenya happen, some are seasonal, some are permanent, and we keep working to improve. So some of the issues currently we face is a system like Adisasa. This is one of the system which is an online platform for this is where all stakeholders get into the portal and try to communicate to the Ministry of Lands. This is where you transfer property. This is where you register property. This is where you do your searches. So the system currently has many issues that you can't do a search of a title. So that means you can't buy property. You can't move basically. And at times it goes to the extent of once you do searches, you get the wrong result. So this is one of the issues which has been holding on the issues of land. The other issue is to do with the building code. Currently, we have a building code, which was a 1968 document. Look at the innovations when you travel around the world. So we are missing out on those parts of innovation. So, I mean, you're restricted. It was very prescriptive instead of performance-based. These are some of the things that we want in the construction industry. We want to be let to work and deliver products so that, I mean, KEBS is there to check on the standards. We need to be left to work on performance than prescription. Maybe other things at title conversion and Sectional Property Act, which of course means Sectional Property Act, you need your own title after you buy your own properties. So some of these may hinder development of housing. And I think those are some of the issues we have.
Thank you, Stanley. John, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I can comment. While I am in the mortgage space for off-takers, ABSA plays in that space because we finance home owners, and we have two routes. The popular one in Kenya is through construction of your own home. They say about 86% of potential homeowners would like to build, so we are in that space. But we're also in the space of financing those who want to buy complete properties. And in that, we are also key partners with Kenya Mortgage Refinance as one of the shareholders, but also one of those with the largest stake in terms of the available funds for onward lending. Some of the issues in housing, and for housing I won't even talk about mortgages, is what, from where we see in terms of the issues. And I think the pipeline of potential homeowners is derived from a population. We have a very rapidly growing population and a very, very young population. Very interesting when you imagine that 84% of our Kenyan population is below the age of 35, of which a third of that is between 35 and 45 who would be your potential homeowners. So when you go back to how many are graduating into adulthood, that's around 18 years, you have about 500,000 to 800 people turning into adulthood. That creates then a big challenge as to how do you house all these people. Because even if you look at the plan around affordable housing, the units that are being planned or that are projected to try and satisfy that demand, it's quite phenomenal. So that's one of the biggest challenges, that you have a pipeline of potential people who need housing. It's one of the key things. But building on that also, there's a question of income. I wouldn't say poverty levels. I would say the income distribution, where the average income, or what you call the average income of a house of someone being around 20,000 Kenya shillings per month. Now when you ask that person to dedicate money to a home, or even now to housing, then it also becomes a challenge, especially now when you introduce the element of how do we plan for home ownership or housing. So again, looking at the population and demographics, you realize that the potential for those who can qualify for, say, mortgages then become a very tiny piece. So among the things that we've tried to do to tackle that is to introduce financial trainings and literacy early on. So we have a program we call Ready to Work at ABSA, which tries to, one of the pillars is building financial skills. And in financial skills is around how you plan for some of these financial goals, including home ownership, which is a very, very key component when it comes to housing. So those are some of the challenges that we are facing. Of course, he has mentioned a bit about the historical setting, that we did not have a concrete housing policy that is being driven from the top levels. So if you say Kenya has been independent for about 50 years, but we are only into about 7 years or 8 years where the conversation around affordable housing structures being set in place. So you can see the historical impact that could have delayed as this was accumulating. So those are among the issues we could see in the housing sector.
Thanks, John. Anything you want to add, Chris, particularly with your mortgage financing experience over many years in Kenya?
I think, thank you very much. Allow me to comment on the same and start by, I think we could also be the problem ourselves. And if you go through in Kenya, there's a fact that when they try to introduce appropriate technology in terms of building blocks and everything else, most of the Kenyans who will go to site, the question they'll ask about the house is that whether it's a bulletproof. I don't know where they got that one from. And by that simple definition, they said no to any appropriate technology, meaning you have to do houses in a traditional way. That by itself spells doom in terms of time, cost, and that means that introduction of mass housing has been a challenge. Let me ask another question, and the question is a house a utility or is a house an asset? Do I need to own the house or can I leave the house as a utility? Again, another very difficult question. Why are we insisting on owning the house if I can use the house and leave the house? So if you look at most of the financing plans, they are based on home ownership. So they are geared for you to repay within 10, 15 years. Why can't it be 100 years? Why can't it be a home ownership across board, across generations, if that's what can create affordability? I guess that's bring another issue why we insist always on a house as an asset instead of a house as a utility. I think the other thing we have to look through is also the, the aspect of logistics. How's the whole construction industry? Today we are gathered here and everybody's eye is looking at us as the financiers. But I can tell you, remove financing from any project, it is still not affordable. That I can tell you for sure. Financing is about 8%. Remove it. Most of those houses are still not within the affordability. Meaning then, we have to dig deeper in terms of the logistics. I think one of the weakest link of affordable housing in Africa today is the logistics. Most of the houses and the profit is lost within that process than in any other way. So unless we start addressing the logistics of housing delivery, we are not going to succeed in that journey. And in our experiences now across the market, it's coming out that the countries that are perfecting, the ones that are beginning, and I've looked at a country like South Sudan, could be doing very well in logistics because they have a time lag that is very well defined. So if you look at their cost, is much cheaper than other countries because they have arranged their things very well. I think the other thing is value chain. Why must we import wood from very far when wood is lying in Tanzania? How can we correspond in Tanzania? They're to supply something where it's cheaper for us to be able to do. So the question of affordable housing is, I think, it's becoming a conversation that we need to start changing by looking through how do we get to the next level. The other thing is, where did we lose our common materials? What is wrong with stabilized blocks? Stabilized blocks are made of soil, they are easily available, they can make very good houses, they are cheap. They'll transition us from the slums we have to the next level, but why do we discard them? And why can't we start using them from the top, headed downwards? I think these are some of the discussions that we think to get to the next level if we are going to change. If you're looking at Kenya, Kenya is the 7th biggest economy in Africa. So if you think you have problems here, then look at the other almost 40 countries whose GDP is less than that. Meaning then, the problems that are here are replicated in other nations, especially in terms of affordability. So unless we change the conversation, transfer internally what we have, we will have a challenge in this story. A lot of interventions especially have happened. So many bodies are praying in their area of affordable, but they are not talking to each other. And unless they start talking to each other, that's when they can be able to pull the same direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Very good comment. Hard to follow, Sita, but go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to repeat anything, but just almost a compliment. The elephant in the room is the high cost of interest rates on government paper. So any enterprise, whether it's housing or agriculture or investment in any enterprise, needs to compete with that. And you honestly can't, otherwise you would be able to. If the market could do it, it would do it. You know, Paul, you've seen we're very entrepreneurial. If it was possible to provide affordable housing by the market, Kenyans would have done it. So we now are all talking about blended finance, and how does blended finance work? And this is where the data agenda and open access that CAF is spearheading, FSD is a member, RIAL is a member, IHS is a member. It's just my plea to everyone that we've been in these conferences for 30 years now. We can only make a difference if we share the data and say, as Chris used a data point, finance is only 8%. There's a fundamental mismatch in cost of delivery and demand affordability. If we're willing to come to the data and say, this was the cost of delivery for my projects, all the financiers, these are the people who actually live there, these are the transport costs, you know, then we're actually able to get to the right equation for the blended finance. And the other point I want to make is we released a regulatory review, and because the housing value chain is so long, we found there are 140 different laws and policies that touch on the delivery of affordable housing. So the more we can help to reduce that regulatory bottleneck almost, the easier it will be to deliver. And it speaks a lot to the difference in quality you find. You know, the quality, it's because there's over-regulation, then when you're under the regulatory radar, you're actually providing affordable housing. Power to the landlord, right?
Thanks, Sita. So that's quite a hefty list of really important issues. But let me start with you, Stanley, as a question. The stats show that Kenyans, 78% of them are renting. And this is high by international standards, it's high by African standards. It's over the charts by South African standards. So Stanley, why do you think that's the case? And as you answer, when you're looking for housing opportunities, what do you look for? How do you take that decision?
One of the dynamics of the rental market is that you'd be paying for a mortgage higher than the rent of the house you're living in. So what would you choose to do? I put back to everyone, what would you choose to do if you're paying higher and it's the same house? Why pay more and you can pay less? These are some of the dynamics because of the cost of mortgage, of course. We have an active population, young population. They're on the move. They choose where to live for now. For tomorrow, they don't know where they'll live. They choose a different location. So we are mobile just based on our age and demographics. Areas change even in Kenya. You find that one area is not secure today. Tomorrow, security is a different case. These are some of the challenges of third world countries. So the dynamics that are involved in renting are so many that, I mean, of course, the cost of land. Who can afford the cost of lands? In Kenya, you have a problem. Speculative buyers. Today, price is 1 million, tomorrow 5 million, the next day, for nothing has happened, without infrastructure, without lights. Just the fact that somebody bought and another one wants to buy makes the cost high. So in the midst of all this confusion, we lose out on people who have potential of buying and living in certain neighborhoods. So I think most renters, I think, will buy, most urban dwellers would rather rent and choose their place of stay maybe later on in life as they age up and probably about to retire. Yeah, thanks.
Sita, if I can go to you, because you just made a comment about the market. And it seems that rental housing isn't counted much. And I do want to stay with your data agenda as well. But the stats are staggering. 158,000 housing units per annum, and particularly per annum since 2009 to 2019. So clearly the market's working. But that's about the landlords. What about the tenants? And how do they fit into this equation, do you think?
So I'll try to add to what everyone has said, but I rent. Most people I know rent for the reasons said. You know, it's just so much more affordable. The other point is many people who rent do have a home up country. That's another dynamic. In terms of tenant and landlord laws, Kenya's, again, very, very market-driven. So if you don't pay your rent, you basically, you know, if you default, you basically are chucked out. So there's no supporting mechanism. The frustration we have in trying to promote financial products is all these years of all these hundreds of thousands of people paying their rent meticulously and paying their electricity bill on time, etc., doesn't give them any kind of positive credit score. So while we keep saying we want to lend to the unbanked, we haven't got a framework in place to collect the positive data. And one thing FSD is trying to do is, if we work with any financial sector providers, almost to insist that in our little innovation, they will submit positive data. So that's, you know, it's maybe not answering your question directly. I keep, you know, we've been talking about rental all along. We felt in the FSD strategy, and part of the reason our sister company, FSDAI, has invested in IHS is we really believe in rental as an asset class, even to bring in the pension money into affordable housing, the local pension money. So we need to prove it. And there was this whole idea that we can uplift standards by proof of concept. If IHS builds good green houses and they've signed up to open access, smaller landlords can learn from them. I'm less optimistic that will necessarily happen because of all the regulatory, over-regulation we see. But in terms of just building a rental asset class for local institutional money to find its way as a good alternative to our government paper, I'm convinced we're getting there. And part of it is we'll now start building up positive credit histories.
Thanks, Sita. John, you mentioned something about, well, all this development's getting funded somehow, and you were solving the microfinance puzzle. And if I could ask you and then Chris after that, how's this financing working? I mean, it looks like it doesn't seem to be a big constraint, just given what I saw. Is it a constraint? And how's it working? And how would more formal sources of finance help this process, if at all?
Thank you. I think if you look at the Kenyan economy, it's a very unique economy. If you start with the simple fact that much of the money flows through our phones than through the bank accounts. It's the same way when it comes to the housing side. There's a lot of money that flows that would not be tracked through mortgage or project financing. If you start at retail level, if you look at the number of mortgages we have at less than 29,000 in Kenya, it is not reflective of the homes that we have in the country. And much of this has been financed through through unsecured products, which are very, very available by commercial banks, cooperative unions. So there's a lot of financing that goes into housing that is not tracked and counted as a mortgage or property financing. So there is that. Then when you go to the landlords, there is a big piece of diaspora remittances going into real estate. If you imagine that we have about 4 billion Kenyan shillings coming through, or rather 4 billion coming through, half of it goes into real estate and property financing. That creates then a channel for properties to be built. So there are many landlords in diaspora. But if you track that through mortgages or commercial financing, you won't find that. Then, of course, there's the diversification that happens from businesses, businessmen, SME, small and medium enterprises in the country, and professionals. The most route they go for financing, they diversify through big finances that, again, go into projects. So it will be more of a business loan, but when you trail the actual direction, it will be in the property world. So that then distorts what you see from when you analyze from a project financing and the reality on the ground. But that's where much of the financing will be coming from.
So Chris, taking that into account, would more formal long-term financing available to contractors and landlords and developers would it make a difference? Do you think it's a critical part of the landscape that that you guys need to develop in Kenya?
Thank you very much. Yes, it would, but I think I want to qualify why yes. I think what you find now is that if you go like a country in Kenya, real estate is classified as a very risky venture, and not only in Kenya, in most of the markets, purely because of the cycles that follow. So you find the kind of money that comes there even for money to be available to a developer, is not easy. And the key issue is that, like we say, the market is not integrated end to end, meaning then exit is not very clear. And as long as exit is not clear, the whole journey is not visible to any person. So to me, I think the first thing is de-risking the process. And one of the key things of de-risking the process is looking at something like infrastructure. And I'm not talking about the key infrastructure, the roads. The roads, like in Kenya, we have roads that can open up. But if you go down there, sewer, power, and the other things that are associated, they need to be attacked. So financial institutions must come to upgrade that first, because that's a journey into home ownership, and that makes it easier. And again, ensure there is control for delivery. So if these funds are coming to go to that level, it helps. Then that can only happen if the government is giving a subsidy to the people who are taking care of that. I think from there, the other thing that needs to happen is the whole management in terms of how do we institutionalize even those processes so that it's not an ad hoc thing, it is something that can run continuously. So if the funds come and find a system that is structured, it is very easy for us to scale up. But if the funds come and they are channeled through, again, a bank and defined for mortgage and project finance, naturally, they'll still get stuck because the funds would find better use, better return in other segments than this real estate. Thank you.
So Beatrice is giving me looks, telling me that we've only got 5 minutes left and we want to open to the floor. But before we do that, the theory is that concessionary finance is finite. It's not sustainable, it's not replicable, whereas market rate finance is theoretically limitless. What is the issue in Kenya? It seems to be that there's a lot of discussion around money's expensive, that market rate finance cannot be applied to part of the solution. And I open up to the panel.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think when we are DFI funded, the big thing is about enabling markets. And the fear is that you can distort markets. So part of the problem in Kenya, I think, is the elephant in the room, lending to government paper. As the previous panelist on the big stage said, that's paperwork. You can do billions by blinking your eyes, right? So that's a big part of the problem. The other part is I feel, and I'm making a big appeal to everyone, we already have many people joining up to our open access initiative. We don't know the realities. So it's very hard to even get to your blended finance to a project when you don't know for sure who the family is, what the income status is. Are you serving the 40 to 60th percentile, the 60 to 80th? If we all accept that even the 60th to 80th percentile is not served, but we have the data to prove it, it's easier to get the finance to flow. Another thing I have to touch on the regulation again for real estate and affordable housing. Our laws require us to provide parking, for example, which is a huge cost. And most of the developments you saw in Pipeline and Kahawa don't have parking. So we have a two-tier system where the markets are providing the affordable housing. It may not just be as decent as we want, et cetera, but it is meeting the market need. And the challenge for us is to share our data so we bring in the finance, so we create that scale of slightly better quality affordable housing.
Thanks, Sita. What is it? The no parking, no lift, 8-story apartment block. Right, on that, ladies and gentlemen, any question you'd like to ask the panelists? I've got two, one over there, three. Take this one, take this one. That lady over there, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Emma Miloyo, friend of EAPI, friend of most panelists there. Some of you have lent me money. Don't look at me right now. But wonderful discussion. And I loved your perspective in terms of pipeline and what we sometimes try to hide from. But it is serving a market need, like you said. Another elephant in the room that maybe the non-Kenyans may not be quite aware of is we're about to have our finance bill 2023 and budget cycle, getting to that. And there's a big 3% housing levy conversation. Best practice worldwide is to have a housing fund, get people contributing to that. I'd just love to hear this perspective because there's a lot of resistance from Kenyans, but apparently, and we all know this from our PS in housing, that's been his big push even from the previous government. He happens to be the same person who was there in the previous government. Do we need that? Is that the silver bullet to solving in our scenario the deficit in terms of affordable and decent housing? We'll not use your words against you.
Thank you.
In a
you
court
pass
of law.
it
Thank
to
you.
The gentleman over there. We'll take a couple of questions, and then the gentleman here, and then Beatrice says that's it. Go for it.
Okay. I'm
what was the contribution of real estate? Nothing has come out of the economic survey to show that we are making strides or not. Mr. Maina, what happened to Boma Yangu project? Because affordable housing was big talk during the Jubilee government, and now Miloyo talks about the contributions by civil servants towards buying homes. Kindly shed some light on us about this issue, because it's becoming emotive and Kenyans really don't understand it. On the political turmoil, Mr. Shege, how is DRC, Congo, Sudan crisis, and the recent protests impacting on affordable housing investments?
Thank you for that, yeah. Thank you for that. Let's start with the second question. You guys were talking about government, private sector providing government responsibilities. Surely infrastructure is a government responsibility, the retrofit and stuff. Why are Kenyans not talking about it? Chris?
Thank you. Very hard questions that are coming through. And I wish we had somebody who can be able to answer. But I think let me give it a shot. I think whereas I'm not retained to talk about the 3%, allow me to comment as a Kenyan. In the markets where the differential between the have and have-nots have gone so far, it's becoming impossible to have any peace. All of us have gone through the Maslow need theory. Which is the basic need? Is it shelter? Shelter is very basic. If we put more of our people out of shelter, then we are risking the economy entirely. I am not proposing that the 3% is the best way, but I'm saying something has to happen and give in. If that doesn't give in, then it means even you who has that 3%, you will not survive. The insecurity, and I know 1 or 2 countries where now, today that's the biggest talk. So I think let's converse on what can we do to uplift housing in Kenya. I am not saying that is the best way, but we need to. If we don't, social security will become a thing of the past, and we'll still suffer. On the other thing, I think is looking through what is coming through. I think the government has a role of market aggregation, and I'm aware that something like Boma Yangu is a big stride on the part of the government to try and aggregate the market as a way of being able to give confidence to the developers. I think what has maybe not happened is after that aggregation is certification that those people really have the capacity. And I think what you are looking at is an interplay between the two. That there's a market aggregation, the people are certified that they can be able to qualify, and the banks are willing and aligned to do that, and there's a supply of houses to match that. Once those things are aligned, the logistics part that we said about will be home and dry in terms of home ownership. But in terms of the packages, there are many. I can tell you in Africa, the interventions are in thousands. Each country is trying its own method, and there are so many. So let's give a chance, but let's see what can work for all of us to come beyond shelter. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And then you ducked my question, which was, why didn't you talk about government? So I'm going to ask for a concluding remark from you, John. Why are you guys not talking about government and its public good responsibilities?
As I mentioned earlier, we are part of the system in terms of the ecosystem that is in housing. And where we are in a space where there's partnership between public entities and the private entities. And I think MRC is at the forefront of affordable housing, where the government has partnered with banks and SACCOs in driving that. And we are seeing much, much more participation in that front. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. If you look at the projects that are being lined up around affordable housing, we have thousands and thousands of houses lined up now where the government is going out to provide land, but then they turn to private entities to look for financing and the construction for those housing. So that still remains the main area for success in this.
Super, thank you, John. And can you join me in congratulating our panelists? Thank you very much, everybody.